Hey guys, today we're going to be continuing watching the Engineer 101 series by Uncle Dane. This one is going to be called Moving That Gear Up and Back. I cannot wait to watch this. This series has been really good so far, and I think there's only one more after this, and I could be wrong, but there are a few more Uncle Dane things that I'm going to be watching because all of you guys have been commenting and let me know which ones are the best. I really appreciate it. This series has been so awesome. I'm about to start playing as Engineer for the first time, and this series has been super helpful. Really good tips for a new player. And I just can't wait to see what we're going to learn today. So thank you so much, everybody who's been liking and commenting on these recent videos. I really appreciate it. With that being said, this is your first time coming across channel. Do not forget to hit that sub button. Please and thank you. And let's go ahead and jump into it. All right, the intro. Yes, I love this intro, man. I don't know if he uses this for like all his other videos, or maybe it's just like a this series only type thing. But I know you guys said this is his own music, its own intro. It's just super cool to see this, man.
Well, I guess that'll do.
Hey everyone, Uncle Dane back again.
Nice.
Episode of
It's actually Uncle Dane this time. It's not like the last one where it was a spy man that has pretty much infiltrated the video there.
Engineering 101. And this time we're going to be going over a pretty important part of playing Engineer, and that is essentially game sense. Now, most people have heard the word game sense thrown around before. It's basically the ability to make decisions based on the state of the game as a whole, and not necessarily just what is in front of you. For an engineer, game sense can come in extremely handy for staying alive and keeping your buildings constantly up in the correct places according to what is happening around you. In competitive mode and casual mode servers especially, you're going to be working with teammates who are probably not going to be communicating with you at all, so relying on your game sense and taking cues to make certain plays based on other things around you is an important skill to develop. And that's what this episode is basically about, but for the most part, I'm going to be touching on the two most important decisions an engineer can make during a game, and that is where your buildings will be the most effective based on what the team is doing, and when it is a good idea to aggress and retreat. So let's get right into it, shall we? First off, there's something important you'll need to know about.
It said to get your NG butt out of there at the end of that.
Before we start, and that's the invisible barrier that we're going to call the front line. This is an invisible line that is constantly moving backwards and forwards based on where you and your teammates are fighting the other team. It is important, as an engineer, to be aware of where this line is as much as possible, because it can help you decide the best places for your buildings to go.
This is true. I didn't really think about that.
Have a limit to how far forward it can go, and yes, sometimes it's literally right in front of the spawn room door. Those games are what we call
you never really know with this. I guess it just keeps changing.
Unbalanced, and they don't really count. And
yep, it just keeps going.
The front line usually ends where the enemy team can see you from their spawn room door without having to physically leave it. For example, on Payload Upward, the front line is right here. The hill gives the defending team cover from the snipers who can easily headshot people from spawn, and any blue team member who fights you in this area is going to have a huge advantage in that they have a payload cart to heal off of, as well as a safe spawn room to fall back to. As a member of the defending team, you have none of those things, so playing behind the front line as opposed to in front of it usually puts you at a huge advantage. You can even out the playing field a little bit by forcing them to come to you, away from the safety of their spawn room, and into your bulky defenses. More examples of the front line having a limit can be found if you look at where you're able to fight the enemy team without giving up your ability to fall back safely. Usually, a semi-experienced team will naturally fall into these positions.
I love these dudes. I'm not gonna lie. This series has been like really informative. Things that I definitely would not have really been thinking about until probably at least a day or two of playing with Engineer. So I'm really glad I'm watching this. For just like with the Spy Psychology series, it really helped me to get like really prepared to play Spy. When I played Spy, I did much better than I thought I was gonna do. Still not great at all, but a little bit better than I thought. So this series feels like it's probably gonna be the exact same way. I'm really glad I'm watching this first.
And so when you're playing as Engineer, being prepared to play around the established front line is important. So now that we know where our team is playing, let's talk about the ideal building placement situation, starting with the sentry gun. Ideally, your sentry should have the objective in its sightline while also not being...
I do really like the way that his screen looks. You guys said that was a custom thing that you can download or something. I don't know how many other custom looks you can get here for all your stuff, but I do like the way that his game is looking.
too far forward. Placing your sentry gun in a way where your teammates are always playing either within or just outside of the range bubble is the best way to ensure that they have a backup damage dealer if things get to be a little too much for them to handle and they have to back up. You'll want to place the gun in a spot where it will take the least amount of damage from a distance while also providing a way to punish enemies who extend just a little too far into your team's holding area. And remember, the biggest counter to a sentry gun is an uber-charged power class, so keeping the gun far enough back in order to make it difficult for the ubered enemies to actually walk up to and damage the sentry while they're invulnerable is a recipe for a great sentry spot. As for dispensers, these buildings are extremely important and should be placed in a safe area where the enemy can't actively spam at it or the teammates who are going to be using it. So finding a wall or a bit of cover closest to the front lines without also being so far forward that it gets destroyed can be exactly what your team needs to effectively fall back to and then continue to stay in the fight once they're refreshed. It's important to not put the dispenser so far back that it encourages teammates to congregate so far away from the front line that the enemy is able to advance forward, but you also shouldn't place it so far up that you constantly have to repair or rebuild it when the enemy inevitably finds it and destroys it. And remember, the dispenser isn't just for you to use, it's for the team.
It's for everybody.
So don't just put it down next to your sentry gun where your team won't be able to use it safely. Remember, the enemy is going to be shooting at your sentry gun, and you don't want your team to be taking collateral damage while you're
this is no good.
So place it far enough forward for your teammates to use it while also allowing yourself to walk over and get metal out of it when you need it. It's also important to note that placing all of your buildings next to each other in general is a one-way ticket to get everything destroyed by one demo man or a sapper happy spy. So the more you spread out your buildings to protect from singular attacks, the less likely it will be that everything goes down in one simple push from the enemy. Just don't spread everything out too far, because if something gets sapped or damaged, you'll want to be able to walk over and deal with it in time. And the teleporter is the last building to talk about here, and it's also the most passively placed building compared to the other two. You'll want to put it in a place somewhere relatively far back from the front lines, but also placed in a way that encourages the user to walk in the right direction when they arrive at the exit. If the enemy can see the teleporter without actively infiltrating the defenses, it's too far forward. If the teleporter is too far back...
I love this video so far, man. Like, Uncle Dane does a great job. There is some humor in here, some great editing, which is always nice, but there is a lot of, you know, things to laugh at, which has been great, but sometimes it's like this where it's just purely like great tips, really helpful for new players. Like he said, I think in the last video, the video before, he was like, there's always a new baby engineer somewhere that needs to be learned or that needs to be taught how to do this kind of stuff. And this is just great. This video series has been super, super helpful, man. And I'm just so shocked at how great this series is. And I see why everybody was like, you got to watch Uncle Dane, because I completely get it, man. Like, not only is there some great humor in it, but it's actually really informative on what it's like to play this class and things you need to be looking at, especially with someone like me who's so new that there is no way I would have been thinking about this the first couple of times I played as engineer, like not even a little bit.
Then it loses its usefulness because it starts to place your teammates in a way that allows the enemy to start pushing forward again. Try and hide the teleporters in a place where the enemy won't find it, but also doesn't get your teammates lost when they use it. Face the teleporter towards where you want the user to go by right-clicking to rotate it when you're about to place it. The arrow on the blueprint indicates what direction the person will be facing when they pop out of the exit, so don't face that arrow towards a wall or in the opposite direction where they're supposed to be going. So now that you know where the best places are to put each building relative to the current front line, let's get into the meat of the video here. What do you do when everything starts to get a little out of hand? What should an engineer do when his dispenser goes down, his teleporter is sapped, and his sentry gun is taking way too much damage to keep healing? Well, the simple answer is this: don't be afraid to abandon ship. Too often I see newer engineers extremely dedicated to holding on to a point that is in the process of being overrun or is simply already capped. While this dedication is respectable, it's simply not worth your life to possibly get a few more kills. As an engineer, being the dude in charge of your nest of powerful supportive buildings, your life is much more important than your sentries, your dispensers, or your teleporter's life. Engineer nests
That's a great way to look at it.
Considerably less time to set up on the next point without tacking on a respawn timer. So how does an engineer notice that they're about to be overrun? Being a support class who is often set up somewhere behind the front lines without a visual on how your team fight is going, it can be very difficult to tell what is happening up there. But the biggest tool for being aware of the game state is examining what we call the numbers advantage. You can do this by either pressing the tab key to look at the scoreboard, or by simply looking at the handy mini death tracker at the very top of the screen. The people with dimmed out names and skulls next to them are currently dead. So if you notice that there is an overwhelming difference in alive players and dead players between your team and the enemy team, you are at a numbers disadvantage. and you may consider falling back or be prepared to fight a lot of people on your own.
Okay.
Generally, if you look at the scoreboard and see that the enemy team has a numbers advantage, you should be prepared.
Just something as simple as that. I swear I wouldn't have thought about that for a little while. I never would have been looking at like who's alive and who's still, who's gone and who's still here so far, so I could see. I would have just probably kept holding the area.
To play very defensively, or if you believe that it will be simply too much to handle by yourself, fall back to the next point where you will be supported by your respawning teammates. This numbers advantage rule of thumb can be applied to pretty much any class, including the Battle Engineer subclass. Every class can be powerful if the situation is in their favor, but being outnumbered or facing a class that counters your current strategy is never an ideal situation. So falling back is a legitimate strategy that will allow you to be much stronger when you face that same enemy again, because you can choose to fight with your team to even the playing field instead of purposefully taking a fight that you can't win. An important skill in TF2 is the ability to recognize when you are at a disadvantage and making plays based around that knowledge. For an engineer, any 2 versus 1 encounter where you don't have a sentry gun to back you up is almost always going to be a disadvantage for you. So playing passively and trying not to allow yourself to be put in these situations until you have a team or a sentry gun to back you up is the best way to approach fights. The engineer by itself is a pretty weak class that gets more powerful the longer he's left to his own devices to build supportive buildings. So staying alive as engineer is the key to becoming stronger over time. There's a saying for engineers and support classes in general: an engineer is only as strong as his team, which means that if your team isn't supporting you, you won't be nearly as effective. There is a finite amount of impact a single engineer can make by himself, and that's just the way that support classes work. Once you come to accept that, it will be much easier to recognize what fights you can and can't win, and therefore make it easier to decide the best times to retreat and regroup. Another great indicator for when you should fall back is if your sentry gun goes down. Now, in this instance, you shouldn't simply give up and go to the next point just because you lose one building, but the sentry gun is important for keeping people away from your squishy, weak NG body, so if you're caught in a situation without one, you should try your best to stay out of harm's way until you can safely build another one. Falling back only a few feet away behind a wall where your sentry gun can't be actively fired at while you construct it is the best way to rebuild without constantly being attacked. You can easily gauge whether it's safe to move the gun back into a more effective position by checking the scoreboard, or by simply peeking back out to see if your team has won the battle and you can return the sentry to its more effective position. Now, falling back is important for the longevity of your life and making the most out of your time on the battlefield, but the second part of taking advantage of the numbers difference between teams is knowing when it's a good idea to move that gear up. As we discussed earlier, buildings are only effective when they're placed in a way where your team can take advantage of them from the front lines, and in offensive situations, being active with moving your buildings to where the fighting is happening is extremely important. On offense, the front line is ideally moving forward at a consistent pace with small pauses where fights happen and offensive pushes are prepared. So as an engineer, you need to be proactive about responding to successful pushes and moving your gear forward with your team. The most important building for offense is the teleporter. Being able to keep the entrance and exit in the correct spots quickly is a skill that requires thinking ahead and a little bit of map knowledge. Be aware of where...
Yeah, because those teleporters, like, they really help, man. They really make a difference when you're down there playing.
Where your team's spawn is moved to when they cap a point, and be prepared to get a teleporter entrance in front of it as soon as possible. A dispenser can act as a second medic for an offensive team, so remember to keep it in a spot.
And the dispensers are just as important in my opinion, because if you're like right in the chaos of it all, you run over to the dispenser and get some ammo, get some health, and then jump back into it as opposed to just dying and having to respawn and go all the way back. So they're both very useful.
They're hurt without having to walk too far or getting spammed out while they're healing up. And a sentry gun is primarily a defensive tool, but in the moments where there's a standstill and your team needs time to build up uber for a push, a sentry gun can still be very effective in denying overextending players trying to disrupt your team's preparations. Not to mention, building a sentry near the objective on offense can be very effective in denying defenders from defending you the cap time. It all just comes down to timing your placement correctly.
Excellent sentry placement.
Overall, the knowledge of what to do in certain situations can be obtained by looking at the scoreboard or recognizing when you can or can't take a fight, and it can improve your game sense and make you a better engineer. But the most important step towards getting good at these things is acceptance. Realizing that the engineer is certainly not the strongest class in the game, and that it's definitely not intended to be a class that racks up a ton of easy kills, is an important thing to consider. Because in the end, an engineer is only as strong as his team, and when your team isn't around, around, you need to be able to make decisions that can affect the outcome better than if you were to just go down with the ship and be dead when you could be rebuilding. So practice walking away. There's absolutely no shame in retreating when you're at a disadvantage. In fact, it's often an extremely skillful play to make, given that you are actively keeping your team supported along the way. So thanks so much for watching. I hope you learned something, and I will talk to you, nieces and nephews, next time. Bye-bye.
Oh, man. All right, another fantastic video by Uncle Dane. Of course, I'll be sure to put the original video link down below if you want to go check it out for yourself, and please do if you haven't, because this series has just been fantastic, man. I've enjoyed it. So if you enjoyed this video or this reaction, do not forget to hit that like button. It really, really helps out the channel here. If there's anything else you want to see me react to, just let me know in the comments down below. And of course, as always, I'll put it on the list to make. There's a few other Uncle Dane videos I'm going to watch. I know there's one more. I think it's just one more after this one. I could be wrong. One more, and then that's it for the series. I don't know if Uncle Dane has any more series, but I know that there was a few videos by Uncle Dane that you guys requested that I watch. I'll definitely be giving those a look. And that's all I got for you, man. I've really enjoyed this entire series. It's just been super helpful. Just as good as the Spy Psychology series. I feel like they're like hand in hand, because Spy Psychology was just so great, man. It really helped me out with Spy, and this is like giving me the same vibes. Like, they're really, really good videos, and they're really funny, but they also have like moments of real like seriousness, of tips and helpful things for new players, and it's just really awesome to see. So I've really enjoyed it, man, and I really appreciate everybody that requested I watch this. I really, really understand, and it's just been a really, really fun thing to watch. So I appreciate it, man. That's all I got for you. I will see you in the next video, and do not forget, it's Orc Army for life.